Hello, MotoAmerica fans. This is Paul Carruthers. I'm the Carruthers part of Off Track with Carruthers and Bice. I'm joined by Sean Bice. As always, he's out in Ohio. I'm in California. And Sean, how's everything out there today?
Yeah, it's really good. I don't know. We're getting in early. We seem to, I know we always seem to go towards weather on this stuff, but it's gotten unseasonably cold a little too early. I don't understand it, but I think we're going to warm up a little bit. It's going well. It's going well. Actually, Paul, it was terrible on the last podcast. I kind of put you on the spot and say, hey, are we going to get the schedule this week? And Paul, sorry to do that to you. I guess we're still kind of looking at a couple of things with it, but I didn't mean to do that. I thought for sure it was going to be coming out this week. And I guess it's another maybe week or so. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not your fault. I mean, I kind of thought the same thing, that we were on track to have it last week, and that wasn't the case. But we're real close. It's just one of those things when you need to get contracts signed and things like that, and some of them go more quickly than others. And I know Chuck Axel is working as hard as he can to get as far as I'm concerned, the schedule is complete. But like I said, there's some things that need to be signed, and then we'll be good to go. But I anticipate early next week with it. I know everyone's excited to see what the schedule's like, and it's always nice to be able to start making some plans, whether you're a team or fans. So yeah, we'll get that thing out as soon as, believe me, we want it out as quickly as anybody else. So we're trying.
Yeah. And I'm not going to give anything away, Paul, but I will tease it by saying it's going to be different next year, and it's going to be kind of exciting and surprising in many different ways. So fans, get ready to see that schedule, because it's probably not what you're going to expect, and probably not what you thought it was going to be like. And I'll just leave it at that. So
yeah, I think it's going to be cool. There's some twists and turns that are a little bit different that'll just change things up some. So but overall, it's pretty standard, but like we said, with a few tweaks. But let's get started with today. Our guest today is Tige Daane. Now, to me, that always sounds like he should be a cruise ship captain on a Norwegian boat, but he's actually not. He's MotoAmerica's technical director. I think this will be his third year already. He can correct me on that if I'm wrong, but I think he's going to be going into his third season of MotoAmerica. And obviously during the off season, one of his it's probably an ongoing process throughout the season, but at least during the off season is when he's got to get things buttoned up. And that's, with technical rules for the following season. We had a press release issued recently where we outlined some of the basic stuff that had changed. And let's talk to Tige. Tige, first of all, good morning. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Just lovely. Tell us a little bit about your off season. As I just mentioned, I know when in the process do you actually start talking with Chuck and the FIM and Scott Smart and whomever about the following year? Is that something that happens in the middle of the year, or is it not something that happens until the season concludes?
Well, really, it's just like it's more of a personal goal that I try to get the rule book out as soon as possible. Even this was a little bit later. So we'll start talking, probably April-ish. We start talking pretty early on season, and there's a lot of discussions. Obviously, I'm meeting with manufacturers and a lot of different people. So yeah, it starts a lot earlier than people think.
Yeah, and Tige, one of the things I want to start with is to talk about really last year, and it was a pretty, I felt, radical change, but turned out to maybe not be so much with this Supersport Next Generation. And there was a lot of hand wringing and hemming and hawing among the people thinking that Panigale V2 was going to be the overlord, and then the 750 Suzuki was going to do something. And we heard a lot of talk early on from some of the teams and even riders with regard to the R6 and whether it has become obsolete or whatever. And this entire time Josh Hayes kept saying it's a good package, it's a good bike, I can win on it, and he certainly did. And he quieted some people down, and I think Rocco towards the end of the year started to get his riding figured out a little bit better. He had to come to an understanding with how the tire was on his bike I guess, the front tire, and he learned to trust it a little more. So there were a lot of factors went into the fact that when it all came good at the end, it was pretty darn balanced, and Hayes always felt that it was. But every party, I guess, on every side is going to sort of complain or say, you know, they have an advantage or whatever, but it was a pretty delightful ending to the season. I mean, I know that Josh did, you know, win early, but it's still, the races were compelling for sure. I mean, you know, obviously Hayes won, you know, Rocco won, Tyler Scott was up there, Sam Lockoff was up there. It was pretty amazing how balanced it was. And right from the start too, even the Daytona 200, let's go back to that finish was incredible. I mean, you had 765 Triumphs in there. You had obviously, well, Heron until he had the gas problem, but then you had a 599 R6 involved. And, you know, that was probably the best example right off the bat of how balanced Supersport Next Generation was. You had to feel pretty happy or satisfied that you did some good work on that. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, I mean, Daytona, obviously went into Daytona pretty stressed out. It was the first time anywhere in the world that really these next generation bikes have been raced. So we brought the guys from Mectronic, we brought Scott over, and he was impressive. But it was a great race. I mean, I'm very happy with the way Next Generation turned out this current year, and Daytona, especially, that race was incredible. And another thing, most people aren't aware that in Supersport this year, each manufacturer won a race. Kawasaki, Yamaha, Triumph, Suzuki, and Ducati all won one race this year.
That's great, Tige. And Kawasaki, I'm glad you reminded me. Yeah, absolutely. Jason Farrell for one on that 636. So absolutely, that's a real testament to good balance. That's for sure.
Yeah.
So you got to be satisfied with that. So what the process, Paul touched on it at the opening. So tell us about what the process is. Is it with these rules in the off season or even during the season? Because I know you're working on it all the time. You know, there's input I think it's FIM, AMA. I guess when the rule book comes out, it comes out, I think, from the AMA, but I don't really understand that because we obviously have input in it from MotoAmerica. FIM has some. Is it a combination of three entities that kind of work together on making this happen?
You know, the rule books, it's got a few layers. Yeah, probably more than I'd like. But the FIM gives us guidance. You know, they don't have a mandate. It's still our series, so that we use their guidance, especially for Superbike, Supersport Next Generation, Junior Cup, and Stock 1000. The other two classes are our MotoAmerica classes. So we don't actually, you know, we write those rules ourselves, meaning there's a process that it goes through. So you have the permanent bureau that is the final decision. The rule book itself is definitely owned by the AMA, and me and Bill, we work together and we write it together. But the process of creating rules is there's a group of people that are involved with that. We have a lot of meetings about it. So probably more than, you know, that a lot of people like, because I'm always asking for meetings. So I want to change if, you know, I'm looking to make some adjustments or something, or if somebody else may be looking to make adjustments, whoever that person is.
From the outside looking in, I would believe that, like, Sean and I couldn't do this job. Sean could do it. Sean could do it technically. I barely know a Phillips screwdriver from a flathead, so I couldn't do the technical part. But I think both of us would suffer from the fact of not having thick enough skin. Is that
Oh yeah,
the case with that job? I mean, I watch you. I see how people interact with you. I think you have a lot of respect in the paddock, which is obviously important with that job. But I'm sure there's times when you still just get a lot of shit that you have to take.
Oh yeah. I mean, that just comes with the territory, you know. And depending on somebody's mood, I mean, people, when, you know, it's a very emotional sport. So a lot of times you come to me with a very emotional argument, you know, and a lot of times, you know, if I'm coming into somebody's pit or if I'm bringing their bikes in, it's not always the best reason. So, you know, people probably get a little bit more could potentially can get a little bit more jumpy, so to say. But no, I mean, look, all in all, what we're trying to do is create a path that everyone can be successful in, right? So in each class, you know, and my goal is just to make sure that there's, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? You know,
Parity.
Correct, between all the riders to try to make sure that everybody has the same opportunities. That's my outright goal. So yeah, but you're right. You got to have some thick skin when you're doing it, you know, and hell, I get emotional sometimes too about it. So it's part of the day. It's part of the game.
Yeah. And Tige, did you know that going into the job? Because Paul's absolutely right, especially for me, man. I always remember the running joke and the scene from a lot of the Back to the Future movies when Michael J. Fox, if you called him chicken, he would like go, "Did you call me chicken?" And he'd go immediately mental. And that's kind of the way I get sometimes about things. So I couldn't handle it. I suppose if it was something that was absolutely part and parcel of my job, I might be able to, but I think being calm is part and parcel of my job, and I'm still not that. So did they tell you going in with this, or did they know, did you have this demeanor, or is it something you had to kind of work yourself into doing? And did they tell you ahead of time, you know, you got to have a thick skin?
I mean, I've been in racing for quite a long time, so I had a pretty good idea, you know, because I was on the other side of the fence for such a long time. So yeah, I had a pretty good idea about that part of it. I think what I was a little bit unprepared for is how much politics play, you know, can come to play with it. But you know, we work through it, you know, and I have a good staff. I got a good support team that helps me, you know, with the partners and Chuck and Nicole. And so when we get into big, you know, I don't want to say spats, but whatever the situation is, you know, I have a good support team around me too. So it's working out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it.
That's good. So I'm not going to require you to have that thick skin with some of the questions I got, but I did kind of go through some of the rules, and I thought it would be interesting to ask you some things about some of the rules, kind of more why they are that way. And I guess the first one I want to ask you is, let's start off with Superbike and asking about this transmission, the fact that you can choose a ratio in the beginning of the season. I don't know if ratio is the right thing I'm saying, but a transmission in the beginning of the season, it has to be an available one, but you have to stick with it all year. Can you explain that? Like, well, do you think anybody will change what they've been doing? Because they don't really have data, right?
No, they don't have data, all of them. Do they have data of what the new ratio is? I get, you know, that would be their jobs to figure out what ratio they want to run. I mean, so the reason for this change, right, is, you know, we're trying to really, you know, working with FIM. And I think a lot of people don't know that the teams in World Superbike don't actually build their own engines. So where a lot of teams in the US do. So most of the teams, whether it be the A, B, or C teams, they do a contract, whether let's say it's Kawasaki, because Kawasaki provides the engines. Well, what we're really trying to do is help the teams provide that same path, right? So they can take the development cycle and they could call up and purchase an engine. Well, a lot of those manufacturers didn't have engines for MotoAmerica Superbike because their engines already have these transmissions in them. So what we're really trying to do is make it easier for teams to be able to have more support from the manufacturers. So that's the main goal.
Okay, and this is kind of technical to that idea. Okay, so you have a different transmission with a different ratio. Can you achieve that with gearing? In other words, changes in teeth on counter shaft sprocket or rear sprocket. Can you make up for maybe you making the wrong decision on a transmission at the beginning of the year, or can you make a transmission do what you wanted the other one to do with sprockets?
No, because the sprockets will change the overall ratio, but it won't. like if you won't change the spreads between the gears. Does that make sense? So like
Gotcha. Yes.
if they want to use first gear, let's say some want to use first gear, and with the new transmission, they have a lockout. So neutral goes all the way to the bottom. There's no, you don't go from second through neutral to first anymore. Now you can go all the way straight to first, which will really help the bikes, as far as the safety of it. You won't get false neutrals because you can't get into neutral. And so a lot of times you'll change the gear ratio so you can use first gear in a lot of places, everyone's going to set it up a little different. It's going to be really cool to watch how they, what strategy they go for, whether they do a short ratio, however they're going to set that up. It's going to be interesting to see.
Okay, so that makes sense. That gearing situation is sometimes if you're on a straightaway and you just haven't got enough top end or anything. Well, that doesn't help anything about the fact that you might have a taller second gear than normal or with a different transmission. So is that accurate to what I'm saying there?
Yeah, similar. Yes, it's close.
Okay.
Each bike has its own. So each manufacturer, whatever their OEM transmission is, so they're going to, the teams can make the adjustment for what they feel will help them per our tracks. So.
And based on the way that our tracks are.
Okay. And I asked.
Go ahead, Sean.
Oh, no, that's okay, Paul. You go ahead. Based on the way our tracks are.
Based on the way that our tracks are, which are mostly tight and not a lot of top speed, it seems like you'd pick a ratio that was better for those tracks, and in turn you might suffer like a MotoAmerica. Is that, or am I off base with that?
That's a tough call, right? So I'm kind of curious to see what people decide. I don't want to speculate on that. I'm kind of curious to watch. Some of them may use what's already used in World Superbike. So and some people may. I imagine a lot of them is going to stay with stock. And so I don't want to speculate completely on that, but it's going to be interesting to see for sure.
Right.
And Tige, some of the rules I've seen, for sure, that neutral lockout is fantastic. I mean, obviously the safety purposes of that are amazing. I love it. And Max Flinders said he likes it a lot. He's going to look at what they're going to have for the R1 and see how he can put it on his bike. And we've had some conversations about false neutrals and stuff. So I totally get, and love the fact that that's going to help these riders so they don't just send it, screaming off into a turn because they're in neutral. So that's a great rule. I'm sure there are other reasons for having it besides the safety, but the safety aspect of it is obviously a key thing. I want to switch and ask you a couple of, so there were only 2 classes this year that had a change in the minimum weight. And one of them is baggers. And baggers, I think, went from 630 pounds down to 620. And my first question is just basic. Why is the minimum weight lower? Because, well, let me couch this, because last year, and I might be wrong about this, but in talking to some of the teams couldn't get down to that minimum weight of 630 anyway. So I'm wondering, okay, what was the reason for making it even lower? And is there any chance that any of the teams can get down that low?
So that's one. The minimum weight on the baggers actually is not changed. Last year it was 620 pounds.
Oh, okay, Tige. I didn't realize that. Okay.
It got put in red. The year prior it was 630. Sorry guys about the dogs.
It's okay.
That's okay.
So this year it did get changed. It was in red because I originally had changed it to even lower to us. We had discussed going a few pounds lower, and then we put it back to last year's, and I just forgot to take it out of red. So that one in particular, that the weight did not change in King of the Baggers.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
A lot of everything.
Well, that wasn't a case where you needed to have thick skin. I didn't mean to point that one out, Tige.
Oh no, it's okay. All good.
And you're right, it was 6:30. Now that I think about it, I kind of forgot when I saw the number there, thinking it was different. So, okay, the other one in the rules there, and tell me about this one, the change in the RPM limits for each of for the Indian and the Harley, and the RPM limits are different for each bike. I understand the engine characteristics are different, but why did the RPM limit change? Did it go up? Did it go down? Why was it changed?
There was no up or down because there was never an RPM limit. So we're putting in an RPM limit this year to slow down for one, I want to say slow down the bikes, but slow down the development of the motors. Trying to take a motorcycle that went from 5,500 RPM to 7,000 RPM is difficult, right? So I don't want to say where they were, but we're putting in a limit to slow down that development and, to help with reliability, because what's one of the biggest things, we want these things to finish. We want them to race and put on a great show, but we also need to get them to be a little bit more reliable. And that was one of the things that we all discussed would help that situation. So.
Well, I'll tell you, you hit the nail on the head, and that's what I thought, because when I looked at it, I thought, well, rev limits would suggest possibly not letting them rev so high that they grenade the engine. And I mean, we saw some situations this last year with obviously oil on the track and some issues there. And that happens when you push an engine to the limit. I mean, you see that in other classes sometimes as well. So I thought it might have had something to do with that. Is there anything else in the rules this year that you guys have put in to try to help control that, if not catastrophic engine failure, but this issue with oil leaks? Because obviously it's something that affects our series, the scheduling, the other classes, and it's something we don't want to see. I thought there might have been some change in either the design, shape, or volume of the catch pan underneath the engine. I don't know. Can you speak to that and other things that might have been done to help with that, what we encountered this past season?
Yeah. So what we're doing with the catch pan is we're moving to where the manufacturer, so Harley's going to provide a catch can, Indian will provide a catch can to all the teams manufacturers. So they're required to provide it because, they make I don't want to discourage anybody else. They make a really nice product or a nice part, and they spend a lot of time with the design. And so we want to make sure that everyone's using that same design to help minimize these problems. The other thing is, placement of the catch cans are going to be a little bit different, where they're inside the bags in case there is so that's a secondary form of containment. The bags must be sealed. So we're doing a few things to try to help alleviate it. There's no fix, right? For when an engine comes apart. When an engine comes apart, it comes apart. So what you're trying to do is minimize it.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought that was, and that's cool. I mean, if it's kind of, I don't know how to put it, but if it's standardized and everybody uses the same one, then you would think the design would be made to do the job correctly, and that everybody uses it is getting the chosen effect from it. So that's again great, and that's another safety thing with these rules. So I love that. One of the other things I wondered about, and this is interesting. So, well, let me talk about the whole idea of, it's not a 2-bike rule, but the fact that you have a bike and then you can have another bike. Although one of the things that and Paul knows this better than anybody, I'm an insane proofreader. So I kept getting hung up on this thing about on Superbike. It talks about rule 2.4.10 says mainframe and spare motorcycle. On all the other classes, Super Sport, Stock 1000, Baggers, Twins Cup, and Junior Cup, it says mainframe and pre-assembled spare frame. And I was getting hung up on, is a pre-assembled spare frame the same as a spare motorcycle? And that's a question for you.
Yeah, really, the Superbike rules are the same with all. If you read the actual rules, they're the exact same across the board. We pulled basically the paddock. I went and spoke to about 70 riders, I think I had at Pittsburgh, and all but one was in favor of making this change. And really what this just does is to me, it helps the smaller teams because 90% of the people already have enough parts to put a spare motorcycle together in their trailer, or they already have a spare motorcycle in their trailer. They just don't have it out, which is, what we're trying to, technically is not really allowed. So what we're saying is you can have a spare motorcycle in your trailer now, completely built, ready to go. But you can't just use it because something happens. You have to have a catastrophic failure to come to me and ask for that, to go to that second motorcycle. That's the same thing that happens with Superbike now for, whether it be, they, at Brainerd, I think, they had a pretty big failure, obviously, on the attack bike, and they needed to go to spare motorcycle, because it had such a large failure. But normally they try to fix it. So the thing about the spare motorcycles, they have, the bigger teams, they have more hands that can go towards fixing these motorcycles when they come, when they fall down or whatever, or an engine fails or whatever the situation may be. Where the smaller teams only have sometimes one guy. So if they can go to another motorcycle in case of a big failure like that, it's going to be a lot easier for them, at least in my opinion.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, anecdotally, we talked to Max Flinders a couple weeks ago, and he basically admitted, he has a 2015 R1 that he keeps in the truck, and he said, so for him, I mean, it's just basically, it's kind of what it was before. He just didn't have it out, but he said exactly that. He said he has it that way because it's only him and his guy Tim, and I think his dad Martin helps out a little bit. So that's a perfect example of, taking all the pieces to put together another motorcycle is a lot harder than having this essentially spare motorcycle on the side, but out of view. So it works perfect for them. And I think it works for all the teams, even the factory teams. The one thing is that I don't get though, and I have to laugh about it because I don't know what we're doing here. And Tige, again, you don't have to have a thick skin on this. I'm not going to call you out on it, but I'm just trying to understand. So it says and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. Basically, it says during setup day, no restrictions apply regarding the location of the spare motorcycle. So that implies, okay, you can unload it from the truck. It can be sitting out there while you're setting up your paddock. But it says from the start of the first practice session, any spare motorcycle must be kept out of view. And I get that. Why is that? I mean, do we not want our fans to see there's another bike? I mean, what is the reason for that?
This was a lot of work with FIM, and it's how they word theirs. And, since we work really closely with the superbikes, with them on superbikes, we've been trying to go down that path. But, again, for them, I think they think it makes it a little easier to just keep it in the back, work on what's going on. And then it takes away the perception that they have, that they could be bigger, smaller. So I don't know. I don't have a complete answer for you, but
I mean, the bottom line is it's not like the old days where Gagne could come in on one superbike. He's got another one sitting there on the other side of the wall. I mean, on the racetrack side of the wall, he jumps on that one, goes out, comes back in, jumps on the other one. I mean, those days are gone, but it does give them the opportunity to not have to try to hastily put something together when they could actually make it a little easier on themselves. And ultimately, it's a safety thing, I think, because like I don't worry, and I said this on the podcast a couple of weeks ago when we had Max on, was the attack guys you don't worry about. They've got a bunch of qualified guys, they've got a bunch of hands on the job, they all know what they're doing, and they can make these changes quickly and safely. But it's like you worry about the guy at the other end of the pit where maybe it's his dad and his brother, and they struggle just to make things work under a normal situation without being stressed about having to build a second bike.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
My other thing is, am I correct in thinking that the tighter the rules, the harder your job is? In other words, is Superbike the easiest for you and maybe like a junior cup the most difficult?
I mean, you are right that obviously if you free things up for the people to be able to modify, it's easier to you don't have to really check that part too often. So Superbike is, yes, I would say Superbikes generally it can be the most difficult in certain situations, but overall, yeah, I think it works that way. Junior Cup, I wouldn't say is the easiest, but the production racing classes, well, they're all production racing classes, but the more stock racing classes can be a little bit more difficult as far as teching. I mean, you definitely find more things in those classes.
All right, I'm going to ask you this because I get the question asked to me a lot just by fans. But talk to me about Parc Ferme. And
Okay.
I think I know what the object is of Parc Ferme and why Parc Ferme exists, et cetera, et cetera. But explain to you, like if a fan comes up to you and says, hey, what are all these bikes doing parked here after every session? And what's this Parc Ferme, this French crap you guys are talking about? Tell us a little bit about that, Tige, and tell us why that's the way that it is and why it's important.
So, when we do initial tech, we're not looking for legalities. We're not looking for every legal part on your motorcycle. We're looking really at safety items to make sure that bike is safe to go on that racetrack. Parc Ferme's come into play after, kind of has two different reasonings. One of them, it allows the tech officials or the tech stewards, however you want to say them, to go through all the bikes and make sure that, they might have the correct tires on them. They're not using parts that should not be on the motorcycle. It also allows the other teams to walk around and look at them and, to make sure it kind of self-regulates. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Where they might see things that happen and they say, well, we want to protest this situation because we're seeing this part that maybe we did not catch. So it kind of has two purposes, one for the tech officials and one for the teams to be able to also see what's going on. Right.
Because theoretically, a guy could, if Parc Ferme didn't exist and I had an illegal motorcycle, I could ride it back to my truck, change out what's ever illegal about it in case you guys came to look at it.
Yeah, in theory, correct. Because before a bike comes to Parc Ferme, it never leaves an official site. So they can't take, if they come off the track, go into the pits, they're automatically, well, I don't give out penalties, but a penalty is then applied to
right.
each team. So usually it's a loss of times. So.
All right. Well, that makes sense.
One of the things I want to say, Paul, you actually helped me to understand something. I've mentioned this to Tige a few times, and I think I drive him crazy with it because when these rules first came out, I said to him something about a 2-bike rule, and Tige said, we don't have a 2-bike rule. And I'm like, okay, I can't understand this. But now, Paul, I get it now. So yeah, in the old days, they used to have a backup bike right in the pit box with them. Well, they can't do that now, but they can have a bike squirreled away in their truck or whatever. So if they have a catastrophic failure to that one bike, they can have another one, but they don't get to try out two and see which one feels better. So actually, yeah. Paul, thanks for clarifying that.
If you look at MotoGP, it shows how the rule is to perfection. MotoGP, Marc Marquez can crash his bike and get a ride back on the scooter and jump on another one. When Cameron Beaubier crashes his Moto2 bike, he's basically done for the session or until his crew can put that bike back together. And I think that in a nutshell, that shows a single bike rule and it shows a 2-bike rule.
Correct. And
right.
Yeah. And we're allowing the build to the use of it to have a spare bike ready. So where most people, like I always did, is I'd have a rolling chassis, but I would actually have the wiring harness in and you have it kind of put together the way the rules allow, but then you have an engine over here. It's the other thing, it's much harder to transport that way. It's easier. I would say 80 to 90% of everyone has enough parts to put another bike together in some form or another. And so to be able to have it all together just makes it easier.
All right, I got one last thing, Sean. I know you've got one more, and then we're going to wrap up. But Tige, I know you worked on Michael Gilbert's bikes, and you've been around the paddock a long time. Now, I had always heard that the ultimate tech director is the guy who tried to cheat the most when he was a mechanic or a crew chief. So, and it's your job, but as a crew chief in a series such as MotoAmerica, you are trying to do everything you possibly can within the limits of the rules. And if you were to find something where you could go outside the rules and not get caught, I mean, that's part of the game, right?
Yeah, I mean, to a point. I think to a point.
I mean, it's still your reputation if you get caught.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's probably the number one deterrent.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I know they always say that, but I've only had one penalty ever,
Right.
so it is what it is. But I think the thing about it, having a technical director is not just the tech side. That's probably the smaller side of the entire job. Like you said, there's so much that goes into putting it all together. But yeah, that saying's been around forever, right?
That's right.
It's funny, Teague, because Paul touched on this thing. I mean, it's pretty well known among people that know me that I'm wound a little bit too tight. So I'm one of these guys that if I was doing your job and I saw something, I'd be, aha, you SOB, you broke the law. You probably are like, aha, well, that was pretty clever, but you're not going to get away with it. Is that kind of how you handle it? I mean, you might applaud their creativity, but ain't going to happen.
There's been a couple. Yeah, there's been a couple. I won't say what they were, but there was a couple of checks that we did, and it was pretty creative. I applauded it. That was good. So that does happen.
Okay, I've just got one more question, then we'll wrap up here. So this has to do with, and you've heard me ask this one before. I've asked Chuck a few times about this one, but it's about a particular motorcycle that I do know is competing in British Superbike, but is not yet competing in our series, and it's the Aprilia RSV 4, which I believe is an 1100cc motorcycle, which right there, displacement wise, kind of tips your hat to maybe what one of the issues might be with the bike. Although I've heard dyno tests and horsepower that it may be comparable. I don't know. I know it comes up once in a while. Is that Aprilia a bike that is trying to get in our series, and will it ever get in our series?
There's not too much I can touch on with this. There's been discussions. There's been offers made, but nothing has come to fruition at this point. So I don't know. I can't say it will or it won't. I know that there's been discussions, and that's as far as it's gone. So,
I mean, they basically have to apply for homologation and see if it works, right?
No, there needs to be some much more larger agreements in place before you even get to the part of the homologation.
Oh, okay. Understood.
Yeah, and I mean, as I understand it, I'm not going to say too much either, but I know it's been tested a few times on a dyno versus the track and things too. And I know it has to do with certain things about what the bike comes with, and whether it's an overlord, whether it's competitive, it's kind of all that kind of stuff. And so I know that I didn't know, based on the fact that we do some stuff we look at BSB a little bit. They are FIM controlled as well. And I thought, well, okay, it's in other series around the world, or at least one. So I thought maybe that might indicate that, at some point it may be in there, but I understand and respect where you're coming from on that, Tige. I had to throw it out there. I sometimes get some teams and riders that will ask me that question, and I don't know the answer to it. So I had an opportunity to ask you, but anyway, hey, you did well. Your skin is intact. We weren't trying to stump you on anything, but really it's a tough job, Teague. Paul pointed that out, and you do a great job with it. It's not easy to do. When I come in there and see you're always so level-headed, I'd be ripping my hair out by the roots. So
hey, that's not always true, man. I've definitely had some moments this year. There's no doubt about it. I've had some moments where
we all do.
Yeah.
So,
all right. So we're gonna wrap up. Thanks for yeah. Go ahead, Paul.
Oh, thanks, T. I just want to thank you, and maybe I'll see you before the season starts, but if not, we'll definitely see you at our first race, which I can't actually say is Daytona. So, but I can't say where I'm going to see you after that, or after that, or after that. But I can tell you I'm going to see you at Daytona.
Well, I'll be at the office on Monday, so we'll see. Maybe I'll see you then.
Oh, okay. I'll make a trip up.
All right, bud.
All right.